and a very warm welcome. You're watching Middle East Now on I24 News. Our headlines this hour. A new deal on the table. Israel and Hamas consider an offer of a 60-day ceasefire in exchange for the release of all living hostages. Fanatical and deplorable, Israel slams fresh accusations of genocide by Amnesty International. And Syrian rebels take the country's fourth major city as they advance against regime troops. First, Egypt has set out a new proposal for a deal to free the hostages in Gaza in exchange for the release of all living hostages, of which there are believed to be around 30. Israel would agree to a 60-day ceasefire and the release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, including convicted murderers and terrorists. The IDF would transfer control of the Rafah crossing to the Palestinian Authority. More detail in this report.
Amid the optimism,
regarding Gaza, the most important objective in this war is to bring the hostages home. This is the highest priority before us, and we are doing everything possible to make it happen.
comes a tragic reminder of reality.
Today, we presented to the families of the hostages the investigation into the causes of death of Yegev Bushtav, Alexander Danzig, Avraham Munda, Yoram Metzger, Nadav Popplewell, and Chaim Perry. May their memories be blessed.
Plans for a ceasefire and hostage deal are accelerating rapidly. Egypt, one of the mediators, has put forward a proposal for a truce in the Gaza Strip, which Israel has indicated willingness to negotiate further. This reportedly includes a plan for a temporary ceasefire and a swap deal with humanitarian hostages, women, the elderly, and the injured, in return for Palestinian prisoners. Hamas has shown willingness for a ceasefire, but it is unknown whether they will agree to the terms set out by the Egyptians. Elsewhere, Qatar has just announced that it will resume its role as negotiator on behalf of Hamas after a month-long break, just days after President-elect Donald Trump said that there would be, quote, all hell to pay if no deal was done. Trump has also appointed Adam Berler, who helped negotiate the Abraham Accords and with the Taliban, as his liaison for hostage affairs. Meanwhile, the IDF announced that 6 hostages who were recovered from Gaza in August were likely executed by their captors whilst the Israeli Air Force was striking Khan Yunis in the southern Gaza Strip. Their bodies were found riddled with bullet holes, but the IDF believes that whilst its strikes followed protocol, it is very likely that they would have been killed from the strikes regardless, just as the Hamas terrorists holding them did.
The inquiry investigated the reasons behind the death of the hostages and raised a number of possibilities. The possibility we think is the likeliest is that due to the strike, the terrorists murdered the hostages and the terrorists themselves were killed as a result of the IDF strike.
Hagari also confirmed that the body of Itai Svirsky, who was abducted on October the 7th, has been retrieved from Gaza. He was killed in an IDF airstrike earlier this year. Earlier this week, Trump was informed that around 50 hostages are alive in the Gaza Strip, a number that surprised him as he was previously informed that it was significantly lower. But with 100 people, both dead and alive, still held by Hamas in Gaza, the pressure is on all sides to agree a deal by the time Trump is inaugurated for the second time on January the 20th, and to avoid the payment of hell.
Well, here with me in the studio this hour, Ruth Wasserman-Land is a former member of the Knesset, a former diplomat in Cairo and a research fellow at the Misgav Institute for Strategic Affairs. Welcome, Ruth. Good to see you. And we're also joined by Jonathan El-Houri. He's a public diplomacy advisor and advocate. Good to have you with us, Jonathan. Welcome. So, Ruth, I'll start with you. Do you see anything different this time around, any reason for optimism that we might be moving towards some sort of deal to free the hostages?
It seems that there's more of a urgency in the Israeli government to make a deal at the moment. It doesn't seem that there is a huge difference in what the Egyptians had offered in terms of the framework of a deal. And it seems that the Hamas is very eager to accept talking to the Fatah and so-called having them take over the Rafah crossing, because they know that the Fatah will not stand in their way, or nor can they, if they even wanted to, in actually having whatever they wanted either smuggled in or brought in from that crossing.
All right. Jonathan, do you think Hamas's renewed interest in a deal is anything to do with those comments we had from incoming President Donald Trump earlier this week? He said there would be all hell to pay if the hostages are not free by January 20th.
I think it's a combination. I think, first of all, they do understand that Trump doesn't really mess around, and whatever he says, he might act on it and might not, but no one knows actually what he might do. But on the other hand, I think they got to a point where they are completely isolated from everyone else. Qatar suddenly decided to cut out, although like there's speaks and talks, and maybe Qatar are going to go back to the negotiating table in order to help. But one of their main kind of, you can say, forces that helped them to maintain some sort of dignity and some sort of fighting was Hezbollah. That at the end of the day, although Hassan Nasrallah promised that they will never break the deal, they will never cut off the ties with Hamas, Soleimani, Naim Qasim, the head of Hezbollah terrorist organization, on the 27th of November agreed to split the fronts and basically throw Hamas under the bus. And that's, I think, plays a lot of role into Hamas's decisions, where they have to maintain some sort of stability, or maybe some sort of, you can say, fiction to themselves that they want to stay in some sort of a position, so they're going to do something about it in that matter.
Just going back to your point on whether the Palestinian Authority or Fatah would be able to assert any control in Gaza at this point, you think that Hamas still has a level of control that would make that impossible?
I do think that it would make it impossible, and I think that the Hamas has not moved 1 millimeter. I think that the only leverage, at the words of the President of the United States, the President-elect, was on the Israeli government rather than on Hamas, even though you're absolutely right. They are isolated, but they hadn't moved one little bit. And what they will do is exactly what they said they would do before. From their point of view, having Fatah in the crossing is like having the crossing for themselves.
Okay. All right. Thank you both. Well, let's go down to Hostages Square in Tel Aviv, where our correspondent Zach Anders is standing by. Zach, what about where you are? Any reason to be more hopeful this time around?
Well, it's hard to say, especially when you talk to the families, knowing that there's not any hope until this moment comes to a close, when this chapter ends and their family members, their loved ones are back here home in Israel. But we do have some movement. And what's the most fascinating element here, Laura, is that there's still a sitting administration. I know this is a lame duck term now for President Biden on his way out. And these incoming Trump administration officials seem to be the ones that are getting more momentum right now than anyone that's currently holding office inside the Biden admin. The U.S. envoy to the Middle East, the incoming special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, an American businessman that has been named, at least, by Trump. He does not have that title officially yet. This administration is not in office yet, so he does not have this official capacity still. Flying into Doha, holding meetings with the Qatari PM. He's met with Netanyahu in the last week. And there's now renewed talk that Hamas will make its way to Doha once again. Remember, this saga has included them leaving Qatar. They're going to send another delegation. Qatar back in the mix is stated as potentially hosting new mediation efforts along with Egyptian officials in Cairo, and that they'll once again collect, meet, and host a fresh round of talks, and that Steve Witkoff here is spearheading these efforts. He's quoted in Reuters today as stating that his effort right now is to get a deal done before January 20th, and that they're trying to get a deal done this month. Now, those red lines we've talked about, where Hamas has stated that they're not willing to agree to a deal to release hostages based on the framework that the U.S. proposed back in early August, we're now hearing through sources to I-24 News from Hamas that they're willing to leave some of these red lines and actually come to the table and make a deal. Is that going to be what happens? We'll have to wait, of course, but it is some interesting moments here, and especially just with the historical precedent in these moments. I won't speak out of turn, but I can't remember a time in the history books when you have an incoming president's administration in the States essentially on the sidelines at this point, even as a lame duck, but to see these men like Steve Witkoff, again, they don't hold official titles yet. The new administration's not in charge, but here they are flying around the Middle East, likely on their own, at their own expense, making these moves and meeting with these leaders of Qatar, leaders of Israel, and trying to get a deal done before they're even in office. It's quite remarkable.
Well, let's hope some fresh faces can bring about a different result for the hostages. Zach, thank you very much indeed. Zach Andrews there down in Tel Aviv. Now, deplorable and fanatical, that's how the Israeli government has described the latest report by Amnesty International. It accuses Israel of carrying out a genocide in Gaza, but it's been disputed by its own subsidiary, Amnesty Israel, and buried deep in the report, the authors admit that they had to redefine the word genocide in order to make it fit the case in Gaza. Our Lynn Plachmeyer has the story.
Amnesty International is accusing Israel of committing genocide in Gaza. The organization analyzed satellite images documenting devastation, fieldwork and ground reports from Gazans and says its findings serve as a, quote, wake-up call for the international community.
We found the repeated use of dehumanizing language. We found statements calling for genocidal act and other crimes under international law. These crimes were and continue to be deliberate actions, deliberately calculated to bring about the destruction of Palestinians in Gaza. They have also been perpetrated with total impunity. The conclusion that Israel is committing genocide is unequivocal, evidence-based.
The people within the Gaza Strip welcomed Amnesty's findings.
Everyone is seeing that Israel for more than 12 months is committing crimes against humanity and a war of extermination that resulted in thousands of martyrs. My daughter and wife were martyred around 8 months ago, and I am bidding farewell to 8 family members today.
Amnesty International Israel, however, rejects the report. The organization says in a statement to the press that the report's authors reached a, quote, predetermined conclusion, and that it, quote, does not accept the claim that genocide has been proven to be taking place in the Gaza Strip and does not accept the operative findings of the report. They also go on saying they were not involved in the research, funding or writing of the report. The Israeli Foreign Ministry slammed Amnesty's accusations with a statement saying, the deplorable and fanatical organization Amnesty International has once again produced a fabricated report that is entirely false and based on lies. The genocidal massacre on October 7 was carried out by the Hamas terrorist organization against Israeli citizens. Since then, Israeli citizens have been subjected to daily attacks from 7 different fronts. Israel is defending itself against these attacks, acting fully in accordance with international law. And so with this new report, the international pressure on Israel is increasing even more while the war in Gaza still rages on.
Well, with us now, Andrew Fox is a former officer in the British Army and now a research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. Good to see you, Andrew. So, first of all, what do you make of the timing of this report?
Yeah, it's interesting that it's been launched now before Trump gets into power in January. It's obviously something they've worked on for a long time and have had in their back pockets. And I think what we're seeing internationally now is a ratcheting of global pressure against Israel. There's always an increased spike in lurid and bizarre allegations against the IDF. And this is a kind of extension of that in many ways. And it always happens just as Hamas are under real pressure, which clearly they are with a Trump presidency about to take over.
And if you delve into this report and you go to page 101, there's an interesting paragraph where Amnesty tries to justify why it's redefined the word genocide. What do you interpret into that?
You know, I'm in two minds with this report, whether we should even be giving it the dignity of taking it seriously, quite frankly. None of the facts on the ground remotely support an accusation of genocide. And I think what they've done is an awful lot of research, realized that their research was leading them to a different conclusion, and so have reinvented the meaning of the word genocide to try and make sure that the facts fit what they want it to fit. If you look at the intent paragraphs they pulled out, they're ludicrous. There's even a speech by Herzog where he goes on to say, in the very same speech they're quoting, that the IDF does everything it can to protect civilians. They quote, the Amalek, they dedicate 7 pages to the use of Netanyahu's using the word Amalek, when in the very same sentence, he goes on to say that he's talking specifically about Hamas. I mean, it's a foundation of absolute sand, and frankly, it doesn't deserve to be taken particularly seriously.
Well, lay it out for our viewers then. As a military expert who has been into Gaza with the IDF several times, why and how is Israel not committing genocide?
Well, we have to break it down into 2 halves. The first half is the intent, and you have to show that. It's called dolus specialis. You have to show this under international law. It's a very specific intent to actually wipe out a race of people. And there's not a scrap of evidence to support that. So we can discount it straight from the word go. And then the other half is what's actually happening on the ground. Yes, people are dying. Yes, people are suffering, but it's a war zone. That doesn't make it a genocide. Nobody's saying that Israel is is stopping births or forcibly relocating children. And so that leaves us with only the final elements of genocide, which is creating conditions designed to exterminate people. And the sheer numbers, even the numbers Hamas pushes out of 45,000 dead, don't support that. 2.4 million before they started, probably slightly more now. The birth rate in Gaza is exceeding the death rate. And so under no possible definition of genocide can we say that is what's happening in Gaza. It just is absolute nonsense.
Nevertheless, very few people will read the whole of this report, but there will be headlines around the world. People will say, there it is. Amnesty International, very credible organisation, says that Israel is committing genocide. How would you suggest that Israelis and supporters of Israel rebuff these allegations?
I think sticking to the facts is the only thing you can do, and keep telling the truth. And it's been a frustration of mine in many ways that the Israeli information campaign that the IDF and the Israeli government have run has been essentially based on doing just that, because it's not particularly effective when your enemy is trying to rely on generating strong negative emotions in the people it's focusing its messaging on. But really, when it comes to genocide, that's all you can do. Just keep explaining simply that there's no characteristic of the Genocide Convention that the actions in Gaza fulfill, least of all the fact that hardly any civilians have died for the amount of munitions dropped. It's about 20,000, I would guess, if you take off the Hamas fighters from the Hamas overall total. That's a tiny number for the amount of munitions dropped, and it's a testament to how well the IDF has done civilian protection that so few have died in Gaza. It's actually something the IDF should be praised for in some ways.
Andrew, thank you very much indeed. Andrew Fox at the Henry Jackson Society.
Thank you.
So Ruth and Jonathan with me in the studio. Jonathan, how does this report help the Palestinians, I'm wondering?
Well, at this time, I don't think any one of these human rights organizations are really interested in what's happening with the Palestinians, or they really care for the Palestinians whatsoever. At the end of the day, what they want to do is they want to attack Israel. They want to make sure that Israel is being attacked for actions that has nothing to do with Israel, or that has nothing to do with reality. We are in some sort of a way in this post-fact era where suddenly definitions has no meanings anymore. It's all about feelings. It's all about what I'm kind of sensing that the situation is, whether it's happening on the ground or not. I mean, this definition of genocide was coined after World War II by a Jewish lawyer that defined that at the end of the day, a genocide means the intent of erasing a whole group of people because of their ethnicity, because of their religion, and goes on. There's nothing relates to that in what's going on with Gaza. Quite the contrary. At the end of the day, Israel stayed in Gaza for a year and 3 months in order to make sure that as many as possible innocent people wouldn't be hurt and wouldn't be injured. We are going way out of beyond. IDF soldiers are being killed in the battlefield inside of Gaza instead of just dropping bombs from the air, which the IDF can actually do that in order to make sure that we're not really crossing the red lines and making sure that, they will be able to maintain some sort of stability of life after the war. And that's something that at the end of the day, these international organizations just keep on meddling and changing those definitions that has really hard meaning, and you can't just do that. And I feel this is something that came in this like post era of actually truth and facts that
Right. I mean, thank you. I mean, Amnesty International, Ruth, used to, of course, champion the causes of political prisoners, and it was a very credible organisation. They do seem to be chasing headlines now. I mentioned that deep in the report they had to redefine the word genocide. I mean, they're at risk of losing their credibility altogether, aren't they? Not just with people who support Israel.
We're just seeing what is happening, for example, in Syria. The Syrian president targeted his own population, indiscriminately killing men, women, and children, also using chemicals as a weapon of mass destruction. That's an example of indiscriminate killing, wanting to kill civilians. Likewise, the Russians just came for the aid of President Assad when those jihadis had taken over some of his cities. What they are doing is literally bombarding whole cities indiscriminately in order to help. No one is coming to ask whether they are killing discriminately, indiscriminately, what they are doing and why they're doing. There is an obsession with Israel and every step that Israel is taking. And perhaps it's good, and perhaps it is an absolute hypocrisy on the part of the world. The only good thing about it is that Israel is indeed walking every step of the way with lawyers and in respect and with respect to international law, taking great concern, and many urban warfare experts have said that have nothing to do with Israel and or the Jewish faith. They've said they've taken great risk in order to make sure that civilians are not killed. Furthermore, had we not taken those risks, we could have ended the war much sooner. This is exactly the reason why we're in there such a long time.
All right, thank you both. Hezbollah lost almost half of its weapons stockpile during just over a year of fighting with Israel, but it's now looking to rearm and recruit more fighters. That's according to the latest American military assessment. A week-old ceasefire between Israel and the group is holding despite allegations of violations on both sides. Well, today, Israel's foreign minister discussed the situation with the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken during talks in Malta. And we did hear from the head of Hezbollah earlier today, Naim Qassem, Jonathan, who was talking about the situation in Syria, and he insists he will continue to fight Israel. For him, the war is very much not over, and that seems to be the same theory here in Israel, that the war is not over, this is just a pause.
Yeah, Naim Qassem, I think in this speech there's really interesting remarks that he makes. First of all, he says that this war was the hardest war that the organization has ever fought since its establishment in 1982, and this is something significant because it means that Israel hit them really hard in this war. And he defines victory really differently from anybody else around the world by saying that our victory is for us actually standing still in some sort of a way and able now to regain power back. Although he recognizes, and this is something that is really interesting, although I don't really trust that man for my own personal reasons, he said that they agreed on the 1701 UN resolution that was signed in 2006 that basically means, and he also says it, that there will be no forces that are not Lebanese forces beneath the Litani
South
River.
Of the Litani, yeah.
This is something that is really crucial and really important because at the end of the day, Lebanon today is in a position where they're fighting for their own definition, for their own freedom, for their own, you can say, independence in the upcoming year. We are looking on electing a new president in the next month, and this is something that could really show where this country is going to go, whether they're going to be 100% fully supportive of a president that his main goal would be to disarm Hezbollah from all of its weapons 100%, or would be someone else that will just let Hezbollah do that again. And that's why I believe that Israel needs to maintain its capability to operate in Lebanon if there is a break from the Hezbollah side on rearming, regaining their power again, and also getting closer to the Israeli border, because we are in a new Middle East. And this is something they also need to understand, that Israel can't keep Hezbollah like it was back then. We can't go back to October 7th before Hezbollah decided to join this war with Hamas.
Otherwise, nobody will be moving back, and Israel could potentially lose control of the Galilee. Ruth, we're hearing that the US envoy Amos Hochstein is on his way to Beirut to kind of supervise the ceasefire. There were a few hiccups this week, weren't there? And both the Americans and the French accusing Israel of violating the ceasefire, even though the Americans did put a caveat in that ceasefire to say that Israel can and should act when necessary for defensive purposes. Do you see it holding? Is this a satisfactory situation for Israel right now?
I think it's a very unsatisfactory situation. In fact, I think this is a very dangerous situation because, as a matter of fact, Naim Qassem is being more sophisticated than his predecessor. He's saying, yes, we will adhere to the international law. We will do what 1701 says, even though they hadn't done so for the past 18 years. Nothing has changed. We will move north of the Litani. We will not move south, but they will let their civilians go back, those Shiite civilians, and who
were happy to have a rocket stored in the garage.
Exactly. But even if it's not a rocket, but just embedding themselves within the civilian population, which is exactly what they will do. I'm counting the minutes. That's exactly what they will do once the civilians come back, because this is what they do. This is the roadmap, and then building and rearming themselves, preparing themselves for the continuation of the war.
The question is whether the Lebanese, the non-Hezbollah population, will let them do that.
So this is a question in leadership and courage. If the Lebanese will see this as an opportunity to oust that absolutely foreign body serving the Islamic Republic of Iran and in no way Lebanon and its people, then there is some hope. And I'm putting my hope in the Lebanese people. But the Israeli government has a responsibility to not only put our hopes and prayers in the Lebanese people, but to make sure and take it into their own hands that our civilians in the north will not be hurt.
Okay, thank you both. Well, Lebanon might be very much affected by what is happening next door, because Syrian rebels have taken the city of Hama and are marching towards Homs. That's the last city on the path to Damascus. We'll have the latest on the situation there after the break. Stay tuned.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back. Syrian opposition forces have retaken a second major city just days after they launched their assault on government-held areas. Regime forces have confirmed they've withdrawn from the city of Hama, and the rebels are now marching on Homs. That's the last city on the path to Damascus. Well, these rebels are led by an offshoot of Al-Qaeda and the Turkish-backed Free Syrian Army. Israel says it is monitoring the situation carefully. Our Alfie Moore has this report.
The civil war that has gripped and devastated Syria for nearly 14 years is back, and with a vengeance, as armed groups take on the Assad regime forces in the western countryside of Aleppo in the north of the country.
The city of Tel Rifa'at and its surroundings were completely liberated, and a number of tanks and helicopters were captured. We captured a number of prisoners of war from al-Assad's groups, and praise be to God. But we are waiting for the area to be cleared of mines so that our civilian brothers can return to their homes.
In clashes with regime forces, anti-regime groups took control of 16 additional locations after capturing Pasif, El-Sid, Al-Karim and Hamra earlier in the day. The Syrian Ministry of Defense claimed that the report was false and stated that, quote, "The situation in every area of Hama is normal and safe. Our forces are deployed in outposts near and far from the city in all directions, ready to repel and confront any possible attack."
Thank God, after 6 or 7 years, God helped us prosper, and we returned with honor and respected, and we returned to our families with honor, with God's will, and we are no more with this dog, this pig.
Additionally, the Syrian rebels have captured the Armored Corps school near Hama city center, which is one of the regime's key bases and serves as the main headquarters for the 25th Brigade.
In the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate, I inform you, my brothers, that your brothers, the Mujahideen fighters, have begun to enter the city of Hama to cleanse the wound that has endured in Syria for 40 years. I ask God Almighty to make it a conquest with no revenge, but a conquest of mercy and fellowship. Praise be to God.
With the news, residents are excited to return to their homes after being displaced by the fighting and the control of the Assad regime.
We are on the way to Aleppo after more than 8 years, thanks be to God. Thanks to God, we will go back and be reunited with our family.
But with Russian warships increasing their missile attacks on the region in support of Assad, the happiness to return home may be short-lived.
So the rebels are marching on, and while there has been footage online of euphoric Syrian civilians returning to their homes for the first time in years, there has been other disturbing video of civilians being displaced or worse. Here to talk about that, Arya Gemo is an independent humanitarian activist from Syria. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Arya. So let me get this right. You're a member of the Kurdish and Yazidi communities. Tell us what has been happening to your family, to your people in Syria over the past few days.
Absolutely. Thank you, first of all, for covering this subject that I think is very important for the region and the world overall. We are very tempted, after almost 14 years of Syrian war, civil war, to call it as Syrian rebels and Syria is going to be free. Unfortunately, I'm here to actually witness and tell you that this is actually not what's going to happen. I'm indeed from the Kurdish Yazidi community in Afrin, not far from Idlib, that is under control of this group since now 6 years, since 2018, with the active support by Turkey. And what we can see there on the ground is some attempt to the human rights of every population, some stealing, kidnapping, and the Sharia is in place over there. So in terms of human rights and living conditions, the Syrians won't be as happy as they think they would be by the relief of having Bashar al-Assad leaving, unfortunately, as much as I don't support him as well. They currently have the choice between these Islamists that are coming from Jabhat al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS. We can clearly see the signs within the fighters of HTS. So what is coming after for the civilians is very, very bad.
So we're hearing about large numbers of people who are having to flee their homes and move to other parts of Syria, parts that were, until recently, relatively peaceful and under Kurdish control.
Absolutely. This was always the case with the with the Syrian war, is that most of the civilians fleeing and that cannot go abroad will actually take refuge in the Kurdish control area, because the system in place actually do respect them in opposition to the one from the HTS. And let me remind you also something, by the way that the HTS is governing, is not for the Syrian interests. When you go to the occupied region of Idlib or Afrin, what you will see is Turkish flags around, Turkish lira being used, the Turkish electricity, your phone will be on Turkish GSM network. So that leads to a question, are we really liberating Syria here? Or is there something else? Because from already the Aleppo government, some of the offices, you can already see a Turkish flag inside and a picture of Erdogan. So what will come next for the Syrian? I'm not sure, but I highly doubt that it would be good, as it wasn't good already 6 years ago for Afrin and Idlib.
And of course, the Kurdish fighters did the West a very big favour back when ISIS took over large swathes of Syria and Iraq. They faced down the jihadists and they won the support of the Americans. But what is the situation now? Have the Kurds been abandoned in Syria, and how can they now protect themselves?
They are currently being abandoned, indeed. The Kurds have been the only force that made a corridor in Sheikh Massoud and in the different district of Aleppo in order to save civilian lives. So we're speaking about dozens of thousands of people who are currently fleeing. There are some numbers of 20,000, some numbers of 50,000. It is yet unclear. And the Kurdish forces have been alone there. They've been alone securing a corridor for people to flee. They've been alone to secure these people's homes, these people's lands. And now they are still accusing attacks from the SNA, supported by Turkey, against the Kurdish forces and the populations that are fleeing. So now the population is slowly moving to deeper part of Rojava, to Kobane and so on. That is also heavily attacked by the Turkish military aircraft. So they don't have electricity, they don't have running water, they don't have gas, because all the civilian infrastructure have been targeted months ago, if not years.
So how do you see the power play happening in Syria moving forward then? Because you've got the Turks, as you said, who are behind some of these jihadist groups in the Free Syrian Army. You've got the Americans, who are a bit ambiguous, and we don't know what the political situation will be once Trump comes back. And of course, you've got the failing Assad regime, which is being propped up by Iran. I mean, what do you see as the future coming out of this for your people?
Well, it looks like the Assad regime is currently very weak and might lose again some position, but it's yet unclear with the support of Iran and Russia. What is for sure is that as much as the HTC and the SNA are winning different locations and keep position, Hama and Aleppo are very big cities which they can expand and grow their influence. That will be translated by more influence by this dangerous jihadist group on the ground that will be not only attacking Syrians, but will be attacking also worldwide. They will be reinforcing their communication strategy, their marketing strategy, and recruiting. Because among those fighters that we're seeing, we find people from Uru, from Kazakhstan, from Uzbekistan. They were hired, and this hiring process will continue. They will continue to create these jihadist groups and send it over also internationally. We've seen these forces that are currently attacking Bashar al-Assad regime attacked Libya, Armenia, and other places in the world, maybe in the future.
Ariel Gemo, great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, Ruth Wasserman-Lander and Jonathan El-Khoury are with me in the studio. So, Ruth, the Israeli Defense Minister says that he is looking closely at the situation in Syria. They're holding a meeting right now. What is the best outcome for Israel? Are there any good options here?
Well, it's basically the impossibility to choose between one bad option and another bad option. We're talking about radicals who are willing to use chemical weapons of mass destruction on their own people, which is the Bashar al-Assad regime, together with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Everybody knows what they do to their own people, and with the help of Russia. And on the other side, we have Erdogan, who very clearly is a disciple of the Muslim Brotherhood, together with other groups, jihadist groups that actually don't get along with one another, like ISIS, like Al-Qaeda, but like others that are under the support of Turkey, and some that are completely not supported by Turkey. On the contrary, they are written as terrorist organizations in the Turkish law. So it's a big salad of very, very radical Islamist Sunni groups. As many of the civilians that have been interviewed had said, do we want Syria to be free of one radical factor that carnaged our people and actually have a different salad, a myriad of leaders that would carnage us in another manner? No.
And you've got to feel for civilians in Damascus tonight. There must be a real sense of panicking just for the sheer speed of how quickly these forces are advancing. The Foreign Minister, Gideon Saar, made a comment last week. He said that Kurds are Israel's natural allies. Do you think that Israel should reach out more to the Kurdish people in Syria and Iraq?
Oh, yeah, I think we've seen a lot of Kurdish support towards Israel and towards the Israeli cause, and basically accepting the Israeli state to exist as it is. I've met with a lot of Kurds also when I traveled and spoke in a lot of conferences and speeches that I did throughout Europe, where they had to flee from the Middle East because they were persecuted because of who they are. But Arya, when I heard Arya speak right now, when you did the interview with him, it really reminded me of my personal story and my family story inside of Lebanon, where we suddenly found ourselves abandoned by the country, by Lebanon, to a terrorist organization that was back then with the head of Yasser Arafat and the PLO organization that slaughtered Christians in Lebanon, slaughtered other people that didn't agree with their move. That this is basically the same thing that is happening.
And no protection.
Yet on the other hand, exactly. Yet on the other hand, the West kind of ignored everything and are not really coming to help and assist those indigenous people that this is their rightful right for self-determination that is being prevented from them by the Assad regime, by the Turks, also by them. We all remember also how Turkey did, the Holocaust with the Armenians. This is something that is, like you can say, history repeating itself with these minorities in the Middle East that not necessarily fits in with the majority that is controlling this area or wants to control them under their Sharia law. And that's something that really concerns, because when Hassan Nasrallah in the beginning of the 1980s, when he started to go out in power, he said that Lebanon needs to turn to and become a Khalifa Shia under the Ayatollah of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And that's something that we're really hearing right now from one side by the Shia supporters, by the Hezbollah supporters and other fractions of the Shia communities that are living in Syria fighting with the Assad regime. And on the other hand, we're hearing the Islamic state with ISIS and other fractions that want to do the same thing, but in the opposite way of things. And we have these innocent people that at the end of the day are the ones who are paying the price of the silent of the world.
And the very interesting thing is that Amnesty International, instead of looking into this very complex situation, is obsessed with Israel. And
in one sentence, it really amazes me. On October 8th, we already had demonstrations all across of the major European cities demonstrating against Israel. We are 1 week after this mess gained again public opinion, and nothing.
And some analysts say that Turkey actually had a big hand in that as well, in what we've seen on the streets of European cities in recent years. I mean, what in terms of the populations there, but also the stirring up, the Muslim Brotherhood rhetoric and all the rest of it. So this could turn out to work out very well for Erdogan.
Turkey, we need to understand that Erdogan's Turkey, not all the Turkish civilians, but Erdogan's Turkey is Islamist. He is a disciple of the Muslim Brotherhood. He always has been. And this is a country that is very strong militarily, very well placed, and is a member of NATO. And this is a very important thing to consider.
All right. Thank you both for now. Okay, let's move slightly to the south, because Tunisia is investing more than $100 million in American-made Javelin missiles. The sale to a non-NATO ally is designed to help the North African state defend its territorial sovereignty. Morocco recently made a similar investment. This despite concerns Tunisia has reverted to autocracy under the current President Kais Saied. Well, let's get more on that with Elisa Pavia. She's Associate Director at the North Africa Programme at the Atlantic Council. Good to see you, Elisa. So, first of all, why does Tunisia need this kind of weapon in the first place?
Hi, Laura. It's great to be back. Well, Tunisia is now in an interesting spot, just like a lot of the North African countries, because it is bordering with the Sahel, and the Sahel we know is engulfed in and mired by political tensions and coups, and a number of very of terrorist organizations are emerging, and so these can pose a significant threat to Tunisia and neighboring countries as well.
And is the US looking to develop closer ties with Tunisia as it is with Morocco?
So the relationship with Tunisia on the counterterrorism side has been quite strong already since 2015. Like you mentioned, Tunisia is a non-NATO major ally, okay? And what this means is that Tunisia has access to a number of defense-related tasks and issues. And so what this means is that there's a strong relationship between the US and Tunisia on the counterterrorism side. So the US will want to continue on that relationship and continue providing that support to Tunisia, because the US does see these terrorist organizations as a threat to its interests as well, but also because, as we're seeing great power competition continue in North Africa, the US wants to maintain the stronghold when it comes to Tunisia, so that it can maintain that alliance strong and not allow countries like Russia or China to overwhelm the Americans.
Well, in the past, the Americans have linked progress on human rights to weapons sales. Egypt immediately springs to mind. But we are seeing repression worsen in Tunisia. That seems not to be a concern this time.
It is a concern. So people in Washington are discussing the ongoing crackdown on political opposition, the ongoing crackdown on democratic institutions. When Kais Saied initiated his coup in 2021, he did use military tanks, and that many critics argued that were funded by US dollars and worried about that. And there has been growing concern and talks about decreasing funding to the military and defense expenditure in Tunisia. However, right now, it seems as though the opportunities outweigh the risks for the United States, and so they're keen to maintain that relationship going when it comes to counterterrorism and in general security issues. But they are cutting costs on other projects. They're cutting costs on USAID projects and other democracy-related funding projects, precisely because of the crackdown on democracy.
Elisa, thank you very much. Great to talk to you as always. Elisa Pavia there.
Hi, Laura.
Now, last year, they banned the film Barbie. This year, it's the musical Wicked. The Gulf state of Kuwait has deemed the musical inappropriate, reportedly because of its so-called LGBT undertones. Well, for more on that, let's go to Dubai. We're joined by Bastien Bory. So, Bastien, the musical was banned just a day before it was supposed to hit the theatres. What happened?
Well, the first hint of an explanation is coming from one of the lawyers who's working with the governments of the Gulf countries to put pressure, or at least to try to put pressure on film distributors, including Netflix and other companies like Disney. These clips and movie scenes are, quote-unquote, unfortunate and painful for our children.
In the actual film itself?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And Kuwait is actually among the Gulf countries that are considered to be more liberal. So that's pretty surprising.
Well, it's quite a juxtaposition to what we saw in Saudi Arabia not so long ago with Jennifer Lopez strutting around in a pretty skimpy outfit in front of a mock-up of the Kaaba. What's happening there?
Well, it happens in pretty much every Gulf country, like the UAE and Bahrain, for instance. Films and movies are routinely cut or at least edited. The UAE, 2 years ago, for instance, banned the Disney animated film Lightyear, which contained a lesbian kiss. But the largest number of complaints are indeed issued by Saudi Arabia, which only opened cinemas for the very first time 6 years ago, and lately had asked Disney to cut LGBTQ references from in the Marvel superhero movie Doctor Strange. And at the same time, Saudi officials were filmed seizing rainbow-colored toys and clothing from shops in Riyadh as part of this crackdown on homosexuality.
Filmmakers will presumably still want access to this very lucrative market. Any sign that they're willing to adapt their screenplays to suit the tastes of the Arab states?
No, not really. Disney, for instance, did not comply after the Saudi warning on the movie Doctor Strange, and the film was just not screened in the country. Gulf states are also regularly clashing with US film distributors over content related to sexual minorities, and the stance here is there won't be any censorship in our countries if there is no offensive material, which pretty much turns this whole thing into just head-on disputes.
Interesting. Bastien, thank you very much. Bastien Borghi over in Dubai. Jonathan El-Khoury and Ruth Wasserman-Land with me in the studio. I mean, do you think that cinema goers in Kuwait are being deprived of something important there?
Well, I think, first of all, it's a disgrace that we're still meddling in some sort of a way that, at the end of the day, this is who people are. This is something that a law can't prevent.
It's the death penalty in the...
Exactly, and this is something that I think we need to kind of advance to the 21st century and, you know, going into the 22nd century shortly. But this is something that we kind of see a lot all over the Middle East, where LGBTQ plus minorities are being persecuted. But on a personal note, I think if the Kuwait government would have just listened to Defying Gravity, they maybe have, they could have changed a little bit of their kind of thoughts about that. Because at the end of the day, this is also something that, you know, people, you can hold people from being who they are to some sort of a point. This is something that will change at the end of the day. We saw also other Arabic countries like the UAE, like Bahrain, that kind of, you know, just put an eye, just hit an eye on it. Just
turn a blind eye.
Exactly, and just let it happen, because at the end of the day, when you prevent something, you would just make a bigger fuss around it. At the end of the day, people also in Kuwait have VPNs and have other opportunities to go and watch these movies if they want to watch them. So there is...
The Gulf states, they're trying to tread a fine line, aren't they? They're trying to modernize, but there are some things they're just not willing to tolerate.
Well, I know that in countries like the UAE, that is all about inclusion and tolerance and so on, and also, you know, accepting other religions. They sort of turn a blind eye, do whatever you want in private. You cannot do that in public. In fact, you cannot even show physical affection between a man and a woman in public. So respect, I would suggest, you know, respect the general atmosphere and the ambiance of the place, or the religious sensitivities up to a point. If they allow you to be who you are, at least in your private life.
And of course, it didn't seem to matter for the British royal family, who just welcomed the Qataris to Buckingham Palace.
Oh, they welcomed them with splendor.
Red carpet, the lot.
And the Qatari partner, the partner of the Emir, was not covered. Her head was not covered.
Absolutely, yes, I noticed
in
that.
open, which is a very interesting phenomenon, I would say.
Very interesting. Ruth, Jonathan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
To you both. We're going to end this hour in Egypt, which has made it into the Guinness Book of Records. Find out more in this report.
The Mansoura University Vertebrate Paleontology Center earned a Guinness World Record for unearthing the smallest fossil of ancient whales discovered in rocks dating back around 41 million years. The whale of the fossil discovered has been named Tutsitus rhaenensis, and belongs to the basilosaurid whale species.
We are very happy that Mansoura University has been recognized in a very big discovery that joined the Guinness Book of Records about a month ago, which is about the smallest whale in the ancient whale kingdom, which was named in 2023 Tutsitus, or King Tutankhamun's whale.
Tutsitus is one of the first marine creatures or marine mammals of whales that completely moved from being amphibious to remain fully living in the water. According to the Guinness World Records website, the discovered basilosaurid whale is 2.5 meters in length.
Of course, the importance of discoveries like this is that they give us a kind of wake-up call to pay more attention. Why? Because we read the past with the eyes of the present in order to know what will happen in the future. We know that Egypt was at the bottom of an ocean because there was ancient global warming. It is possible that global warming can happen now, and it is happening already. And the pace of global warming now is fast. I mean, it is possible. Within years, for example, 100 years, we will be able to see the huge impact of global warming on the coasts of the continents, including Egypt.
Smallest ever fossil. That's quite a claim. Congratulations to the Egyptians. Well, that's it for the show this hour. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. Khaled Ben David is up next. Good night.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish World Weekly. I'm Khaled Ben David, and each week we're going to bring you the latest from the Jewish world, from politics to religion, entertainment to the latest trends, and everything in between. Join me each week as we explore the global Jewish diaspora. Don't miss Jewish World Weekly only on I-24 News.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today. Israel presents to the Egyptian mediators an updated proposal for a hostage release deal, but is Hamas ready to compromise on its key condition? We'll take a closer look. Syrian rebels take the key city of Hama from the Assad regime forces. Is a drive to Damascus next? We'll have the latest. Amnesty International charges the IDF with committing genocide in Gaza as Israel and other critics slam the group's report as biased and inaccurate. We'll have that story. This is the rundown on I-24 News. I'm Khaled Ben-David. Efforts are intensifying to reach a deal that would see the release of some or all of the 100 Israeli hostages still being held in the Gaza Strip. Israeli officials say they have presented Egyptian mediators with an updated version of their most recent offer that would see a ceasefire of up to 2 months and other conditions to secure the freedom of the remaining hostages. Now, this comes amid some reports, unconfirmed, that Hamas may now be willing to make a hostage deal without demanding a full withdrawal of all IDF troops and a complete end to the war as a condition for any agreement. Joe Brown has more on the latest developments towards a possible deal.
Amid the optimism,
regarding Gaza, the most important objective in this war is to bring the hostages home. This is the highest priority before us, and we are doing everything possible to make it happen.
Comes a tragic reminder of reality.
Today, we presented to the families of the hostages the investigation into the causes of death of Yegev Bushtav, Alexander Danzig, Avraham Munda, Yoram Metzger, Nadav Popplewell, and Chaim Perry. May their memories be blessed.
Plans for a ceasefire and hostage deal are accelerating rapidly. Egypt, one of the mediators, has put forward a proposal for a truce in the Gaza Strip, which Israel has indicated willingness to negotiate further. This reportedly includes a plan for a temporary ceasefire and a swap deal with humanitarian hostages, women, the elderly, and the injured, in return for Palestinian prisoners. Hamas has shown willingness for a ceasefire, but it is unknown whether they will agree to the terms set out by the Egyptians. Elsewhere, Qatar has just announced that it will resume its role as negotiator on behalf of Hamas after a month-long break, just days after President-elect Donald Trump said that there would be, quote, all hell to pay if no deal was done. Trump has also appointed Adam Berler, who helped negotiate the Abraham Accords and with the Taliban, as his liaison for hostage affairs. Meanwhile, the IDF announced that 6 hostages who were recovered from Gaza in August were likely executed by their captors whilst the Israeli Air Force was striking Khan Yunis in the southern Gaza Strip. Their bodies were found riddled with bullet holes, but the IDF believes that whilst its strikes followed protocol, it is very likely that they would have been killed from the strikes regardless, just as the Hamas terrorists holding them did.
The inquiry investigated the reasons behind the death of the hostages and raised a number of possibilities. The possibility we think is the likeliest is that due to the strike, the terrorists murdered the hostages and the terrorists themselves were killed as a result of the IDF strike.
Hagari also confirmed that the body of Itai Svirsky, who was abducted on October the 7th, has been retrieved from Gaza. He was killed in an IDF airstrike earlier this year. Earlier this week, Trump was informed that around 50 hostages are alive in the Gaza Strip, a number that surprised him as he was previously informed that it was significantly lower. But with 100 people, both dead and alive, still held by Hamas in Gaza, the pressure is on all sides to agree a deal by the time Trump is inaugurated for the second time on January the 20th, and to avoid the payment of hell.
And with me in studio, our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osran. Ariel, let's look at the reports of this latest Israeli proposal, basically simply just an updated version and the possible prospects of it with Hamas.
Right, so this does come amid reports that were refuted of an Israeli delegation making its way to Cairo today. It most likely will be next week to really hash out the details of this proposal. We're talking about a phased agreement that will see the gradual release of Israeli hostages, a 45 to 60-day ceasefire. Now, the sticking points that were until now were that Hamas demanded a complete Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip before any ceasefire is put in place and before any hostages are released. We are starting to see maybe developments in that area. Hamas officials telling I-24 News yesterday that the establishment of this joint Fatah-Hamas committee is to administer post-war Gaza. That is intended to be a mechanism that will allow Israel to accept such a ceasefire deal. Now, what is even more interesting is that in these deliberations that Hamas has conducted with Egyptian officials in Cairo over the past weeks, the understanding is that Hamas is willing to forego most, if not almost all, their demands until now. These demands are a complete withdrawal and a complete cessation of the war. The demand that they are not willing to give up is the right for residents from northern Gaza who were evacuated at the beginning of the war to return to their homes. Now, this mechanism, this joint committee between Fatah and Hamas that Hamas announced today that it fully supports, this is supposed to allow Prime Minister Netanyahu to sell this to the Israeli public, because up until now he said no Hamas, no Abbas. President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority will be allowed to administer post-war Gaza. So putting this committee of technocrats is supposed to give a semblance of administration once removed from both the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. And so we are seeing more and more statements coming from all the sides involved and those who are not involved, including the incoming Trump administration, that there is positive momentum regarding these negotiations. I will say that if up until now Qatar were the ones who were taking point in the negotiations and that hadn't led anywhere, now it's Egypt on the forefront of the negotiations. This is more convenient for Israel because both Egypt and Israel are stakeholders in the reality on the ground as opposed to Qatar. And so we are expected to see at the beginning of next week perhaps an Israeli delegation headed to Qatar to try and take all these statements and put them into reality, onto paper, to try and push forward a ceasefire agreement.
Maybe some glimmers of hope there. And on that note, let's go to our correspondent Zach Anders, who is at the so-called hostage square there in Zach. And the question is, well, again, it's a roller coaster for those hostage families and their supporters who come out there. But again, we have this, it seems, a window opportunity that perhaps is open to make a deal, at least potentially before Donald Trump takes office in January.
Hi, Kalev. Good to be with you. Yes, still in hostage square, 426 days later. One of the interesting elements has been watching the transformation of this space. You know, pre-war, this is the museum, the art museum here across the street is the Kiria, obviously a very central place in Tel Aviv, a meeting point, a gathering point. There's behind me a tent that's been set up here, and volunteers are accepting donations for you to go inside of this tent and experience a VR simulation of the hostages' point of view from inside captivity. I have not done it yet, but I think I'm about to, after this live, step over and see what that's like. I've been seeing a queue of people lining up to perform this VR experience here. There's live performances here tonight. There's a station to buy shirts and those the bands, the rubber bands that you put on your arm, the yellow bands for support. I've completely forgotten what they're called. What we are tracking with these hostage talks taking place here is actually an interesting element coming out of the States again. The Trump administration is not in office. These officials are right now only appointees in name. They don't have any official capacity. They don't have the office and the ability to spend those resources of the office, but still. President-elect Trump's special envoy, who he has tapped to take this future role, Steve Witkoff, a Trump supporter, a businessman, is going to be the special envoy for the Middle East. The Times of Israel, in an exclusive report releasing today, that he has already, in the last week, been in the Middle East. He's visited with Prime Minister Netanyahu. He's visited with the Qatari Prime Minister. The Qataris. That's an interesting element here. We had been following this saga through this late stage of the Biden administration, Qatar being pushed out, pushed away, no longer in this mediator role per se. They're being brought back into the fold, at least by Steve Witkoff, as what he's been telling the Times of Israel and Reuters, that they're working now to get a deal done. Qatar back in a mediator role. Hamas officials back into Doha, back into Qatar, working to try and create some new framework. And as Ariel has been mentioning, that there is movement potentially on those red lines no longer being red lines. But Witkoff here telling the Times of Israel that their aim is to get a deal done before January 20th, before the inauguration, trying to get a deal done this month. It's quite remarkable, especially when you know that he is doing this on his own expense, or likely doing it on their own expense. Again, not an official title, but getting more movement than any current Biden administration is right now, getting more meetings, certainly.
All right, well, let's see if that bears some fruition. Zach Gand is there in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. Thank you for that, Zach. Zach mentioned the efforts of the incoming administration, but of course it is still the Biden administration that has to really sort of carry the load officially towards a potential hostage deal. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken did meet today with the Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar on the sidelines of the annual meeting of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which was held in Malta. Now, Sa'ar told Blinken Israel believes there is a real opportunity now to move forward toward a hostage deal. Here's what Blinken had to say when interviewed in Malta.
What I have to focus on, what we've had to focus on, is how do we bring this to an end most quickly and most effectively in a way that helps ensure that October 7th and its horrors never happen again, but also in a way that's responsive to the desperate needs of Palestinian people in Gaza. That's my entire focus. There will be time, maybe a lot of time, after the end of this administration for people to judge what we did, whether we did right, whether we did wrong, whether we could have done better, whether we could have done differently. I don't have time to do that now. My time is focused on trying, with every minute that we have, to get the hostages home, to end this conflict, and to put Gaza on a better path.
And joining us in studio now for more is Shiri Fine-Grossman, a member of Forum Dvora, Women in Foreign Policy and National Security, the former head of regional affairs for Israel's National Security Council. And Shiri, we heard Secretary Blinken. We're hearing some reports, potential of optimism, maybe flexibility for Hamas. But there are so many moving parts here to not only just make a deal, but also, as Secretary of Blinken wants to suggest, basically end the conflict in Hamas, something incoming President Trump said he would like to see by January 20th. Is all that even possible given this time frame?
Well, if it is possible, but it's almost impossible, and that's kind of the catch-22 to get all the pieces together. I think if, and I don't know if that's the case. You're more of an American politics expert than I am, but I've been saying this for a long time. If the incoming administration would cooperate with the current administration, it has a lot more advantage to not let the other players maneuver them, right? They can know potentially more pieces of the puzzle and to play with. They can say, hey, Qataris, if you won't get in line, you know what Trump will do. And these kind of things are actually creating some kind of this window, with Trump saying, get it done until I'm inaugurated. And of course, Biden would love to get it done. And of course, there's a lot of also pressure from Israel. We had a group of experts, academic experts, take a look at this, and months ago, throughout the war. And they said, without a concrete threat of Israel taking over territory, Hamas won't cave. And some people are saying this is what is actually happening in the north of Gaza.
Where Israel is developing these bases along the Netzarim corridor.
And giving the impression, and I don't know if it's a false impression or a candid impression, that it will take over territory. And that's what will hurt Hamas the most. So without getting into politics, these are, experts of academia and others. So you have that stick, and you have all the carrots, and you need also carrots and stick over Turkey, over Qatar, and a good relationship. And I think a combination of the incoming and outgoing administration might bring us there.
Right, and without going into a whole explanation, we might say if the incoming Trump administration and President-elect Trump gets involved, that may provide some political cover for Prime Minister Netanyahu as well.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I believe that deeply. If there's any chance of Israel making very significant concessions, it's with the Trump administration.
Right. Okay. Well, let's move now from the hostage situation to the fast-moving developments in Syria, where rebel forces have made major advances in western Syria, even taking key bases from the Assad regime. Now, the Syrian Ministry of Defense previously denied these claims. They say their forces remain strong. But the latest reports indicated that the rebels have taken control of Hama, a key city on this road south to Damascus. Alfie Moore has more in this report.
The civil war that has gripped and devastated Syria for nearly 14 years is back, and with a vengeance, as armed groups take on the Assad regime forces in the western countryside of Aleppo in the north of the country.
The city of Tel Rifa'at and its surroundings were completely liberated, and a number of tanks and helicopters were captured. We captured a number of prisoners of war from al-Assad's groups, and praise be to God. But we are waiting for the area to be cleared of mines so that our civilian brothers can return to their homes.
In clashes with regime forces, anti-regime groups took control of 16 additional locations after capturing Pasif, El-Sid, Al-Karim, and Hamra earlier in the day. The Syrian Ministry of Defense claimed that the report was false and stated that, quote, "The situation in every area of Hama is normal and safe. Our forces are deployed in outposts near and far from the city in all directions, ready to repel and confront any possible attack."
Thank God, after 6 or 7 years, God helped us prosper, and we returned with honor and respected, and we returned to our families with honor, with God's will, and we are no more with this dog, this pig.
Additionally, the Syrian rebels have captured the Armored Corps school near Hama city center, which is one of the regime's key bases and serves as the main headquarters for the 25th Brigade.
We go to where there is terrorism, where we are targeted. Where they kill Islam, we will attack them.
With the news, residents are excited to return to their homes after being displaced by the fighting and the control of the Assad regime.
We are on the way to Aleppo after more than 8 years, thanks be to God. Thanks to God, we will go back and be reunited with our family.
But with Russian warships increasing their missile attacks on the region in support of Assad, the happiness to return home may be short-lived.
Shiri is the former head of regional affairs at the Security Council. I presume the current occupant of the chair is being asked right now, what does this mean for Israel, that these rebel forces are on the road to Damascus, maybe threatening to topple the Assad regime?
First of all, it's a deja vu, and I feel like I'm in history repeats itself. This is exactly what I had to deal with when I was in the NSC, like you said. A little bit slightly different situation there. We still had the opportunity to actually it's very similar. You still have the opportunity to break between Syria. I wouldn't call Syria and Assad right now because I'm not sure if Assad will remain in power, but you had this opportunity to break between the Iranian support and Assad. This is the Shiite crescent, as we call it, and this is exactly what we're witnessing here. Look, both sides, either Syria and the Assad regime with its link and its base of support to Hezbollah in Lebanon or not, or the rebels, the Islamist rebel they're talking about the Tarifat. It's Kurdish territory, and as Israelis and Jews, we support the Kurds in their struggle. So what is happening is positive in the sense that maybe if the rebels take control of every cross-border between Iraq and Syria, and that way prevent the move of arms, that's good. It's good when, if Hezbollah will go and fight for Assad again, but it seems unlikely because they're just very tired from the war against Israel. So, I would say the main interest of Israel, and I think it's very clear, to seize the opportunity to weaken the grip of Iranian and Shiite militias into Syria. How to make it done? It's a little bit more complicated, but I always see the opportunity, and I hope that we have some policymakers and hopefully in the incoming administration that see that opportunity as well.
Right, and Ariel, secure the border, for example, between Syria and Iraq, but we do see these reports of these Iraqi militias that are aligned with Iran, at least saying they're going to be coming across that border to assist of Bashar al-Assad. The question is if it potentially maybe even be too late for that, given the speed in which we see those rebel forces moving southward.
Yeah, the question is, where are they going? Are they going to Homs, to Hama, because that fell already, and the next destination of the rebel forces is Homs, the third largest city in Syria. Now, before we get to Homs, just let's explain for a second the strategic importance of Hama, the fourth largest city in Syria. Once you have Hama, you can reach anywhere in Syria, because that opens the routes to western Syria, where the Alawite minority, President Bashar al-Assad belongs to that minority. Cities like Tartus, Latakia, now they can reach there if they intend to. So strategically, it is a key city that, kind of like Aleppo, the second largest city in Syria that was taken without a fight inside the town. That's what we saw in Hama as well. Once the rebel forces managed to break the Syrian defenses in the outskirts of Hama, there was no fighting inside the city. Syrian regime forces withdrew. Now we are already seeing convoys of rebel forces making their way south to Homs, but this is where we are expected to see the Syrian regime make its last stand before
Damascus, basically,
because it's the last large city before the capital. And so Sheikh Naim Qasim, the leader of Hezbollah, saying that Hezbollah will stand by Syria. It's not only reports of pro-Iranian militias from Iraq making their way into Syria, there's also footage of that happening. So I would expect that the Syrian regime will not let Homs be the third city to fall without a fight inside the town. And there are a lot of moving pieces right now, but the rapid pace of forces advancing is really uncanny, and this is not something that we saw in the previous round of
Did you want to say?
It's a global power game. It's between Russia and Putin and Erdogan and Assad to kind of negotiate what will be the borders of the Assad regime, basically.
Right. I'm just going to say there are some of us of a certain age that remember, of course, Hama as a city that Bashar al-Assad put down a Islamist uprising in that city by basically flattening it.
Exactly. It's called Hama rules, and then...
Using sarin gas as well.
Right, and that leading to the expression Hama rules, meaning you only use brute force in the Middle East instead of diplomacy. I'm sure the people of Hama, no love lost between those people and that remember that and the Assad regime, which has now been pushed out of the city. Well, with the ceasefire back in Israel, the ceasefire in Lebanon is holding for another day, which means the possibility is growing for residents of evacuated communities in the north to finally be able to return to their homes. Now, in the south, along the Gaza border, though there is still, of course, some fighting in Gaza, many of those homecomings are already taking place. Over a year after the Hamas onslaught in southern Israel, for example, the residents of kibbutz Ain HaShlosha along the Gaza border envelope are taking their first steps toward rebuilding their community by demolishing damaged homes, making way for a fresh start. Alex Schloss has that story.
It's a bittersweet day in kibbutz Ein HaShlosha. Heavy machinery tears down the remnants of homes destroyed during the Hamas brutal attack on October 7th, 2023, making room for new beginnings.
We are here today in a historic moment and day, and from here we will bloom again. They broke us, but we will grow again.
Located just over 3 kilometers from the Gaza Strip, Ein HaShlosha was among the hardest hit communities during the attack. 4 of its 320 residents were killed, homes burned, and lives uprooted. Now, many are returning to rebuild.
We say that every person has a name, and every house here has a story. We lost dear people, and the difficulties are great, but a miracle occurred here compared to what happened around us.
The sense of loss is profound, but so is the determination to move forward.
It's a very successful day, very emotional, and it's part of the continuation of the community. God willing, new houses will be built with additional families. This is our determination.
As machinery works tirelessly to clear away the past, the residents of Ein HaShlosha look toward a new future.
encouraging to see. Shiri, kibbutz Aina Shlosha, I think you've been down there.
Yeah, I've been down there with a group of investors from Mexico who came to see and wanted to support back in May, and we met the residents. We heard their story. There's one grandmother's body was found with candies in her hand. She was going to give it to their grandchildren for Simchat Torah, and there she found the terrorist that murdered her. And the community, I actually spoke to Shiri Aviv, and they were desperate to find the financing to rebuild the community, and it's so heartwarming to see that there is kind of this silver lining in the end of the road. It takes time, and hopefully they will rebuild. And this is the powerful, bondage between Israel and Israelis and Jewish Israelis also from abroad.
Right, we should take note that you talk about the funding in the government, there is a program to Kuma to rebuild those communities. But,
a lot of
billions of dollars, and a lot of Jewish organizations from abroad, or groups like the JNF, Jewish National Fund, Karen Kayemet, have been involved in fundraising.
Look, we have to say, the
Israel bonds.
The American Jewish community and other communities around the world have been so, and will be so incremental in rebuilding Otef Gaza and also the north. And they've been there for us, and they will continue to be. And it's just, we shouldn't take this for granted.
No, absolutely not. And anyone who has been down there understands the magnitude of the task. And the Aina Shlosha was even far from the worst of the communities when I've been to places like, for example, Kibbutz Be'eri and some of the other communities down there that were absolutely devastated on October 7th. It's good to see them rebuilding. And as you said, let's hope we see some of those communities in the north that even suffered worse physical damage, places like Metula, for example, will also get the assistance they're going to need to.
Life is stronger than anything. They will come back.
Well, good to hear. Okay, I'm Shiri. We are going out for a break. Shiri Fine-Grossman on our Ariel Saran. Please stay with us. We'll be back just for a few minutes with more of the rundown.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back to the Rundown at I-24 News. Now, we just talked a few minutes ago about the rebel troops, the rebel forces in Syria approaching the key city of Homs and area. We have an exclusive just really coming in the last hour obtained by I-24 News that certainly relates to that.
Yeah, so we explained how Naim Qassem, the leader of Hezbollah, said that Hezbollah will stand by the Assad regime and to the best of their capacity. So now we're getting a better understanding of what those plans are. Now, elements in the Free Syrian Army, this is one of the major factions of the Syrian opposition, telling us, I-24 News, that they've been spotting masses of Hezbollah forces approaching the border areas between northeast Lebanon and Syria, not too far from Homs, areas of Baalbek and the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon, and that they are intending to make their way above and below ground to Homs to reinforce Assad regime forces. Now, these sources in the Free Syrian Army telling us that there are multiple tunnels in the area. The Israeli Defense Forces had already destroyed one 3-kilometer long tunnel in the area connecting between Syria and Lebanon, and with forces on the other side of the border in Syria preparing to absorb these Hezbollah forces. Now, where does Israel come into play? Israel is monitoring these Hezbollah forces massing near the border with Syria, and there is a possibility that Israel will choose to strike them and thwart these reinforcements coming from Hezbollah to Syria. This would not be in breach of the ceasefire agreement as long as these strikes take place in Syria. But indeed, we're seeing that Homs is emerging as the main battleground intended by the Syrian regime and its allies, Hezbollah, perhaps also pro-Iranian militias from Iraq, to stop the advances of the rebels.
Shuri, just briefly, should Israel involve itself somewhat by striking these Hezbollah forces? It had earlier this week struck a Hezbollah figure involved in Syria in arms smuggling.
Well, it depends. It would have to go case by case. But as we see these rebels coming closer to the border, and some of them are affiliated with ISIS, and there is the danger that they will take over Damascus and other key and strategic installations, Israel will have to be forced to make a decision. We don't want strategic weapons to be in the hands of ISIS and Al-Qaeda terrorists.
All right, well, it's going to be interesting to see how that develops and what decisions the Israeli government makes it. Now, earlier we did mention Gaza, where there, of course, is still an ongoing conflict and fighting. The battle is also continuing in the arena of global public opinion over what is actually happening there in Gaza. Amnesty International has now published a report about the situation in Gaza with evidence that they say proves Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians in the Strip. The Israeli government, in response, has slammed the report as biased and inaccurate, and even the Israeli branch of Amnesty International has rejected the findings of their parent organization. Lynn Plachmeyer has the story.
Amnesty International is accusing Israel of committing genocide in Gaza. The organization analyzed satellite images documenting devastation, fieldwork and ground reports from Gazans and says its findings serve as a, quote, wake-up call for the international community.
We found the repeated use of dehumanizing language. We found statements calling for genocidal act and other crimes under international law. These crimes were and continue to be deliberate actions, deliberately calculated to bring about the destruction of Palestinians in Gaza. They have also been perpetrated with total impunity. The conclusion that Israel is committing genocide is unequivocal, evidence-based.
The people within the Gaza Strip welcomed Amnesty's findings.
Everyone is seeing that Israel for more than 12 months is committing crimes against humanity and a war of extermination that resulted in thousands of martyrs. My daughter and wife were martyred around 8 months ago, and I am bidding farewell to 8 family members today.
Amnesty International Israel, however, rejects the report. The organization says in a statement to the press that the report's authors reached a, quote, predetermined conclusion, and that it, quote, does not accept the claim that genocide has been proven to be taking place in the Gaza Strip and does not accept the operative findings of the report. They also go on saying they were not involved in the research, funding or writing of the report. The Israeli Foreign Ministry slammed Amnesty's accusations with a statement saying, "The deplorable and fanatical organization Amnesty International has once again produced a fabricated report that is entirely false and based on lies. The genocidal massacre on October 7 was carried out by the Hamas terrorist organization against Israeli citizens. Since then, Israeli citizens have been subjected to daily attacks from 7 different fronts. Israel is defending itself against these attacks, acting fully in accordance with international law." And so with this new report, the international pressure on Israel is increasing even more while the war in Gaza still rages on.
And joining us now in studio is Michal Kotler-Wunsch. She is the Israeli Special Envoy for combating anti-Semitism, also a former Knesset member and expert in international law and human rights. And Michal, not the first time, of course, Amnesty International has released such a contentious report about Israel, but accusing it of genocide, taking it to a new level for this organization.
I want to explain something. They not only published this egregious report, but they redefined the meaning of genocide in their report. So on page 101, I believe, of what is almost a 300-page report, and this is a systematic thing that Amnesty has done, of course, accusing Israel of apartheid. This is just the next Orwellian blood libel, if you will. They redefined genocide because genocide, coined by Raphael Lemkin in 1944, whose entire family was annihilated in the Holocaust, to describe the atrocities of the Holocaust, for which there was no word, there was no definition, like the kind that the Convention for the Prevention and the Punishment of the Crime of Genocide actually endorsed, adopted in 1948. And the definition of genocide, which requires intent to destroy an entire group, or a part of a group, but it requires intent. Well, you know, Amnesty says on page 101 of their report, redefining genocide, we don't need intent. We're going to do away with that because it sort of cramps their style of accusing, as the Israeli branch actually says in rejecting the report, of accusing the state of Israel of the most heinous crime known to humanity, that is the crime of genocide. And we have to be very clear on this, Kalev. This is part and parcel of that 8th front of war that has been raging for decades, basically hijacking and weaponizing the international law infrastructure and all of the human rights organizations, including Amnesty. And by the way, if you look at their symbol, they even appropriate the Holocaust in their symbol, the symbolism of the Holocaust, and the way that they have appropriated and weaponized the international law institutions, human rights, and the infrastructure that was created so that never again actually renders Amnesty International guilty for the undoing, the destruction of the human rights infrastructure that they were entrusted to uphold, promote, and protect. And so this is actually a devastating moment, not just for the state of Israel, wrongly accused of the most heinous crimes perpetrated by people, of course, as the state of Israel is defending itself from open intent to perpetrate genocide, of Hamas in its founding charter, of the Islamic Republic of Iran, of which Hamas is but one proxy, openly declaring day and night their intent to annihilate the state of Israel and murder Jews around the world. It's not just a problem for us. It's not just a problem, as I said, for Jews around the world who are suffering a tsunami of anti-Semitism because of this mainstream anti-Semitism. It's actually the problem of all that were intended to be protected by this international rules-based order, by these human rights organizations, even as actual genocides are being perpetrated right now, whether in Sudan, whether in China. And that is the devastation and the travesty. And anybody supporting Amnesty, whether it is funders, donors, countries, are going to be complicit in the undoing of the international law infrastructure and human rights.
Right. I just wanted to, and also in terms of the potential concrete consequences of such a report, I want to relate it to a report we did yesterday about the Israel's foreign ministry warning sole Israelis traveling abroad who have been serving in the Gaza Strip that they may face potential arrest while traveling abroad, even warning some Israelis who had served in Gaza who were abroad to come home. And now, of course, these kind of reports feed into that mechanism, so posing a direct concrete threat now to Israelis.
You're 100% right, Kalev, and this intersects, of course, with the international law institutions. We mentioned them, the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court. And now when you have human rights organizations then echoing the very same Orwellian, inverted, libelous lies of not just fact, distorting the fact, but distorting the law, as I said, redefining the term, an internationally agreed term that's been defined since 1944 in the 1948 Convention, the understanding that now we are going to see a kangaroo sort of court, the ICC, the ICJ, holding to account individuals in a sort of Dreyfus moment, a Jacques moment of completely sort of up is down and down is up and flipping the reality as we know it. And yes, there are implications for individuals, not just Israelis, but as I said, the tsunami of anti-Semitism that is targeting Jews around the world, of course, at this very moment and over the last 14 months since October the 7th, is going to be fueled by the sort of report that was issued by Amnesty International in the alleged name of human rights that they have completely destroyed and collapsed.
Right. I just hear I see it looks like you want to just
look. I couldn't agree more, and I want to add another issue here. When they destroy this international order, and I'm actually a lawyer, an international lawyer, and I was responsible on the ICC desk for a while at the National Security Council. When they do that, they allow populist movement around the world that are against the rule of law, the liberalism that we know, the basic values we were promoting for years. They allow them to say, look at them. They're such hypocrites. Nothing matters anymore. And then we really completely laid the ground to awful things. It's just throwing away everything that we believe in, and they're really destroying the work that honest people are trying to do with upholding international law. They just make everything ridiculous. So people that believe in these core values that they took way off the playing field are very, have a very tough time upholding the law.
Right, undermining the liberal social order.
Basically, look, any standard, any rule that you apply selectively or invent, right? In this case, literally invent a new definition to apply on a state party, in this case, the State of Israel, it basically is not worth the paper that it's written on. It collapses the entire infrastructure. That is what Amnesty has contributed to, as I said, systematically, first with a blood libel that they put of Israel as an apartheid state, now with this blood libel, and it has rendered itself not only a completely unnecessary, but a damaging organization to those of us that care for human rights.
All right, we're going to touch on a story now that deals, you might say, with a sort of different facet of anti-Semitism. An event was held last night in Washington, D.C., hosted by the Romanian embassy to the U.S., honoring 3 American Jewish leaders for their efforts in strengthening U.S.-Romanian relations and fighting anti-Semitism. Ironically, it came just as Jews in Romania and elsewhere expressing concern over the rise of a far-right politician who has praised Nazi collaborators, and in a presidential campaign that has also drawn in Israeli officials. For more, let's go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, in Washington, D.C. Mike, give us the background of this story.
Wow, it comes at a very timely moment in U.S.-Romanian relations here, Kalev. Coming up on Sunday, there'll be a runoff for the premiership of Romania. One of the contenders and the front runner right now came up out of nowhere, Colin Georgescu, a far-right politician who has glorified several Romanian fascists who were involved in Jew hatred and anti-Semitism, the murder of Jews as well. So Georgescu right now is the front runner, and this all comes under the banner of what has been decades of progress in U.S.-Romanian relations, which was the highlight of Tuesday's ceremony that we attended at the Romanian ambassador to Washington's home, honoring, yes, a trio of American Jewish leaders with the second highest civilian honor that Romania has to offer. Dan Mariashin from B'nai B'rith International, Mark Levin, who's been involved in Soviet and post-Soviet Jewry for decades, were honored, as was Rabbi Andrew Baker of the American Jewish Committee. This relationship has gone back decades, including the building of the Wiesel Commission to appropriately incorporate the history of Romanian anti-Semitism into something that could better Romanian society and finally try to stamp out anti-Semitism. It's also led to NATO accepting Romania, and that was part of the deal for Romania to be accepted into NATO, was to finally accept its history of anti-Semitism and Nazism during World War II and make progress on incorporating Jewish communities into Romania in an appropriate way. We chatted with one of the honorees there, Dan Mariashin of B'nai B'rith International, to get his take on all the progress that's been made that's now up in the air. Here's Dan Mariashin.
Many of us have lived through the era of the Eastern Bloc, of communism in Eastern Europe, of the Soviet Union, and we knew there was a window, and that window might not be open for a long time. So when that window opened and we were looking for ways to help to ensure the health of these new democracies, it made good sense to say, well, look, NATO is one way of allowing these countries to get firmly anchored in the democratic way and with the West. And I think that not only in the case of Romania, but in the case of other countries as well, the decision by some of the Jewish organizations to become active and to advocate for membership in NATO was the right one, for sure.
That was Dan Mariashin. He, along with Andrew Baker, helped lobby on Capitol Hill for Romania's ascension into NATO, which was, again, a startling development post-Cold War. We also spoke with Mark Levin, mentioned he'd been handling Soviet and post-Soviet Jewry for decades, and that includes in Romania itself before the fall of communism, when Romania was trying to gain most favored nation trade status with the United States. One of the requirements was that they incorporate immigrants properly, and that included Jewish immigrants to Romania. Levin oversaw that process. It eventually led to Romania gaining that status. Levin was honored as well for his decades-long efforts. Let's hear from Mark Levin.
It's a culmination of the work that we've done with successive governments since independence. It's the full integration of Romania into the community of nations. The fact that they are now members of the EU and NATO, and that I hopefully played a small part in the effort to get them to become members of NATO, is very fulfilling. And the fact that the Jewish community of Romania feels so integrated into the larger society, I think speaks volumes to what has happened over the last 30 years.
But Kalev, with all the celebration that was going on Tuesday night, with these awards being distributed and looking back at the decades of progress that was being made, there was also a sense of trepidation, a lot of inhaling among those in attendance, a sense of dread about what might come on Sunday in this election. Rabbi Andrew Baker, who I mentioned was honored on Tuesday and has been involved in these efforts to further U.S.-Romanian relations for decades and to finally try to tie up all the loose ends of all the anti-Semitism that had taken place there for decades. He spoke to us as well about that mixed feeling on Tuesday night about celebrating those decades of progress, and yet also about the harm that may come at Sunday's election. Let's hear from Rabbi Andrew Baker.
We happened to gather between the two elections for president, the first round, which brought forward a candidate that makes all of us troubled and nervous, someone who really stands for the very opposite of all these things we've had worked about. I think the government, which will be formed based on the parliamentary elections, will need to be the bulwark to support democracy and Western orientation, even if this man should win the presidency, but we will see if, in fact, that happens.
All right, there's certainly ironic development, unfortunately, given what's happening in Romania, and then to hear the good work that those gentlemen have done with a country like Romania, which has that history of anti-Semitism. Mike Wagenheim there in Washington, D.C., thank you for that. And Michal, here we have a different face of anti-Semitism. This figure who is this candidate who may win the premiership there in Romania, someone who comes more from the European far right, who has praised Romanian figures who collaborated with Nazis, representing, unfortunately, showing that that other side, that historical, say, side of anti-Semitism in Europe.
Kalev, we have to be very, very clear, and I say this often as a special envoy for combating anti-Semitism, and alongside the coalition of special envoys that just recently adopted these global guidelines for combating anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism has one definition, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition. It matters not if it comes from the extreme right, from the extreme left, from the extreme Islamist. There is one definition of anti-Semitism. And anybody that does not understand that anti-Semitism, over thousands of years that it has mutated and permeated and spread across societies, has been the most reliable sign of the rising threat that we are experiencing right now, and this is just one case study, the rising threat to humanity, to freedom, and to the dignity of difference. That is what anti-Semitism has predicted over thousands of years of its mutating and finding different strains and different forms. It matters not where it comes from. This is the underscoring and the underpinning, by the way, including in an organization like NATO, in which Turkey happens to be a member, and we know anti-Semitism is not foreign to some of those members of NATO. Anti-Semitism is a very important definition that we have to utilize to understand the threat to democracy, and there is only one definition that does that. That is the IRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, that, including Rabbi Andy Baker, who I congratulate for receiving the prize, is very involved in the understanding that when we engage countries across spaces and places, there is one definition that we need to be utilizing if we are going to be able to comprehensively identify and combat what is a lethal, ever-mutating hate.
All right, and that has to be remembered. I want to thank Michal Kotler-Wand, Sherry Fine-Grossman, and Ariel Ostron for joining us on this, as it turns out, very special edition of The Rundown. It is with some sadness that I have to tell our viewers this is my final appearance on I-24 News as the anchor of The Rundown and as also the host of Jewish World Weekly. I want to thank our viewers for joining us. I joined the station 8 years ago, and in fact have been sitting in this anchor's chair for the Rundown for the past 8 years, bringing you the news here from Israel during that time. And I do want to say some last words. I'm proud of the work that I've done here at I-24 News, especially since October 7th, when the station has tried to present the news from an Israeli perspective, but according to, of course, all the rules that govern journalism in terms of accuracy, fairness, being nonpartisan, certainly at least in terms of the Israeli discussion, and allowing other voices to speak. Now, since October 7th, many voices have spoken up in terms of advocacy for Israel, and they certainly have done invaluable work. But I do want to say that Israel advocacy is not a substitute for journalism. And it is extremely and especially important that journalists and those who believe that Israel needs and deserves to have a fair hearing in the media, that events here in Israel and in the Middle East need to be put in the proper historical context, with a focus on the developments surrounding each and every incident, so that a clearer picture emerges. And it is my belief, after many more years of journalism, almost 40 years of journalism, that if these things are done, and if the story of Israel and its conflicts, its divisions, its differences are presented fairly, are presented in context, and are presented in according to all the rules that govern the journalistic approach, that in effect, that in some ways can be the best advocacy for Israel and for its case. Now, I have been reporting, as I said, for nearly 40 years here in Israel. It has been my privilege and my honor to be at I-24 News during those past 8 years. I want to express my gratitude to the management of I-24 News for giving me that opportunity. And I also, most of all, want to thank my colleagues who have been with me, the correspondents that have worked with me, the producers that have presented me and have put up with me over all this time, for allowing me and for presenting me in the best light. I haven't always been perfect in my reporting. I haven't always been right. That's the nature of journalism when you're covering a fast-moving story. But I've always tried to present the story straight on with, I don't say objective, but at least with a minimum of bias and being as fair and true as possible to my profession, of which I am proud of. And journalists don't always get the chance to be proud of what they've done. I can tell you that I have been proud of what I've done here at I-24 News. And lastly, I would like to thank the viewers of I-24 News who have watched us and who have supported us for all that time that I have been on the station, and who have personally reached out to me and thanked me for my work in presenting the news here from Israel. It has been my privilege and an honor to sit in this anchor's chair over the past 8 years. So for a final time, I would like to wish you, the viewers, a good night, a goodbye from Israel, and God bless. Thank you for allowing me to be with you.
Thank you, Kalev.